Clara has received news that her mother has suddenly passed away. She traveled back to her hometown to find her brother Owen waiting for her at their childhood home. Apparently, their mother had arranged for them to meet here, and she was hoping that they would be able to make something of this situation. But even though she loved her sister dearly, Clara didn't want anything to do with Owen. They hadn't spoken in years since he ruined her wedding. And despite their mother's best efforts to keep them together, the damage was done. She couldn't help but notice, though, that Owen seemed relieved to see her. Their mother's will stipulated that they needed to sell the house, but neither of them wanted to live there. So they began the long process of cleaning out the house and preparing it for sale. Their father, however, had been a hoarder, and the house was filled to the brim with useless junk. It looked like an explosion in a paper factory. He had clearly not moved a muscle in the last 20 years. But why? Clara wondered as she sifted through his old clothes. Something caught her eye. It was a small camera with a lens like a blind eye staring back at her. At first, she thought it might be part of some home security system, but it didn't look like any modern camera she'd ever seen before. And what was it doing tucked away in the pocket of an old jacket? As they continued to sort through their father's belongings, they found more cameras hidden in picture frames, behind books, under clocks. It felt like Big Brother was watching their every move. Then Clara noticed a tiny hole drilled into the wall beside one of the cameras, a hole just big enough to fit a wire. This discovery sent shivers down her spine, but Owen dismissed them as mere wires from the security system. To his way of thinking, their father must have been a paranoid man who couldn't trust anyone. But Clara wasn't so sure. Something about the whole thing felt off, as if there was more to these gadgets than met the eye. They uncovered more evidence of their father's obsession as they explored the rest of the house. Reinforced walls were hiding behind the wallpaper, heavy steel bars covered by curtains in the windows. There was even a secret passageway disguised as a bookshelf in the living room. When Clara opened it, she found a spiral staircase leading down into darkness. What on earth was this place? Was their father some kind of recluse? Why would he go to such lengths to hide himself away? The truth was, nobody knew their father very well. Not really. Not since he'd become increasingly paranoid and reclusive over the last 20 years of his life. All they knew was that he hadn't left the house in all that time. Not until he died. But as Clara and Owen continued to search the house for valuable items to sell, they found more signs of their father's strange behavior. In the kitchen, they discovered a trap door hidden under the floorboards. At first, they thought it might lead to a basement or maybe an underground root cellar. But when they pried it open, they found a steep ladder leading down into a dark, dank tunnel. What was this place? Why did their father build it? And what was he hiding down there? They descended into the tunnel and found a labyrinth of tunnels branching out in all directions. Some led to dead ends, others to nowhere. It was like an underground maze with no clear purpose. One of the tunnels, however, seemed to be their father's favorite. It was wider than the others and had a rough-hewn floor. Clara could feel the history of their father's madness echoing around her, the sound of his labored breathing and the scrape of his shoes against the dirt floor. She could almost hear him whispering secrets to himself, his voice growing fainter and fainter as she walked on. At the end of the tunnel, she found a small room with a single chair in the middle of it, and on the wall opposite the chair was a mirror. Clara stared at it, fascinated and terrified, and then she saw it, a faint outline of a man sitting in the chair, as if he were a ghost trapped forever in the tunnels beneath his own home. She felt a cold hand on her shoulder and jumped around, knocking over the chair in her haste to escape. She ran back up the tunnel, not stopping until she reached the safety of the fresh air above ground. What was this place? What did it mean? And most importantly, what had their father been hiding down there all those years? She turned to Owen, her face pale and drawn, and asked him to come see something. Maybe together they could solve the mystery of their father's past. Owen joined her in the tunnels, his face etched with concern. Together they explored the maze of tunnels, searching for answers. Finally, they found a small opening hidden behind a shelf. On the other side was a narrow passageway that looked like it led upwards. With a flashlight in hand, Owen squeezed through the narrow passage and found himself in a small chamber. In the center of the room was a wooden box with a lock on it. Could this be the key to their father's past? As Owen struggled to open the box, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and she could feel eyes boring into her from somewhere in the darkness. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the tunnels, a sound like footsteps followed by a deep voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Owen froze, his heart pounding in his chest. What was that sound? Was someone else down here with them? Just then, another noise, a scraping sound, as if something heavy was being dragged across the floor. Clara and Owen exchanged a panicked look. Whatever was down here with them was getting closer. Adrenaline surged through Owen's veins, and he scrambled to his feet, knocking over the box in his haste to get away. Clara grabbed his arm, her voice shaking. They had to get out of here now. As they fled, the sounds of their pursuer grew louder, the footsteps heavy and purposeful. They could hear the sound of its breathing, ragged and uneven, like a bellows being pumped by a tired beast. They ran blindly, desperate to escape whatever was hunting them in the tunnels beneath their father's house. Suddenly, the darkness ahead of them shifted, and a pair of glowing eyes appeared, followed by the unmistakable shape of a human head. With a strangled scream, Clara and Owen stumbled back, their eyes wide with terror. The figure lunged at them, its arms outstretched, and they could see the wild glint in its eyes, the saliva dripping from its snarling lips. They turned and ran, their pursuer hot on their heels. The figure reached out, its long gnarled fingers inches from Clara's ankle, but she kicked out, sending it crashing to the ground. As Owen and Clara ran, they could hear their pursuer crashing through the tunnels behind them. It was fast, too fast, and it sounded angry. Branches snapped, rocks crumbled, and the air grew thick with the stench of decay. They could feel its hot breath on their necks, hear the sound of its heavy panting in their ears. Finally, they saw a light in the distance and surged forward, desperate to reach it. As they stumbled out of the tunnel, they could hear their pursuer crashing toward them, its voice echoing through the darkness. But when it reached the opening of the tunnel, it hesitated, as if sensing something. It let out a low growl, and then retreated back into the darkness. Safe at last. Owen and Clara collapsed on the ground, their bodies trembling with fear and exhaustion. They looked back at the tunnel, its gaping darkness seeming to stare back at them. And they knew they had to get out of there. But they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every rustle in the trees, every creak of the old house made them jump, and they could feel the weight of unseen eyes boring into their backs. And then it happened. From the corner of her eye, Clara saw a movement in the trees. A dark shape shifted, and for a moment she could have sworn she saw the outline of a man standing there, his face pale and drawn, his eyes hollow and haunting. She called out to Owen, but he didn't seem to see what she did. Was she losing her mind? Or was their nightmare not over yet? Then they heard it again, the sound of footsteps in the forest, getting closer, the snapping of twigs, the rustling of leaves. And then he stepped out of the trees, tall and gaunt, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. He was their father, or what was left of him. His skin was stretched tight over his bones, his clothes hanging in rags around him. And his eyes, they were filled with a terrible, otherworldly light. With a strangled cry, Owen and Clara stumbled back, knocking over the trash cans and sending them clattering to the ground. The creature took a step forward, and they could see the flesh around his mouth hanging in strips, revealing the teeth beneath, long and sharp as fangs. He lunged at them, his arms outstretched, and they screamed. Owen turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at his clothes, leaves whipping at his face. He could hear Clara screaming behind him, her voice echoing in the darkness. He didn't dare look back. All he knew was that he had to get away from the house, from the tunnels, from their father, the monster that lurked beneath their family home. He burst out of the trees and onto the road, stumbling blindly in the darkness. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away from the house. As he ran, the image of their father, the monster that lurked beneath their family home, burned into his mind. He could see the wild glint in the creature's eyes, feel the stench of decay on his rotting breath, hear the sound of his heavy footsteps echoing in the darkness. Suddenly, a car roared past, its headlights blinding him for a moment. Owen flinched, expecting to be hit, but the car swerved around him, its horn blaring. Owen kept running, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath catching in his throat. Behind him, he could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush, its voice echoing in the darkness. But the sound was fading, becoming more distant. Had he lost his pursuer? Had he escaped the clutches of the monster that lurked beneath his family home? In the distance, Owen could see the lights of the town, the warm glow of the street lamps beckoning him closer. With a surge of adrenaline, he broke into a run, his feet pounding on the pavement, his lungs burning with exertion. But then he heard it again. The sound of footsteps, heavy and purposeful, getting closer. The creature was still behind him, relentless, determined to claim him as its own. Owen stumbled, falling to his knees on the pavement. He looked back, his eyes wide with terror, and saw the creature emerging from the darkness, its eyes gleaming in the moonlight. It lunged at him, its arms outstretched, and Owen screamed.